Hey everyone, you're listening to Film Philosophy, where we break down the philosophies, concepts, and structures of filmmaking in the American film industry. We are filmmakers Tiffany Francis, Andrew Coles, and Nzinga Murray. Film Philosophy is brought to you by The Mission Entertainment.
Today's episode features Becky Morrison, and the topic that we are tackling is the militarization of film. Becky got her start in features including The Brave One, Duplicity, The Wild, and I Am Legend. She produced the visual content for the band U2's World Tour, and in 2012, she produced the open for NBC's Sunday Night Football, which was nominated for an Emmy for Best Show Open. In 2016, she produced a short film, To Be Free, about Nina Simone, which was acquired into the Smithsonian's permanent collection. And in case this isn't enough for you, she's also the founder of the nonprofit Globetops, which connects people who have laptops that they don't use anymore with someone around the world who can use one. She has produced over 200 commercials and promos for clients such as Netflix, Hulu, Disney, and Gucci. In addition to all this, she is the founder and CEO of Brooklyn-based production company The Light. The Light is a progressive, actively practicing company in which their ethos specifically is about inclusion, sustainability, innovation, and experience. And we chose Becky for this topic of the militarization of film because she is the real deal when it comes to thinking about real practices on film sets. I remember hearing her talk about how her production company's call sheets are listed in the order of call times, not by rank. And it's such a simple thing, but it really means so much to see her practices in action. It was so inspiring to realize someone like her, someone who is actually in charge, can influence our industry's landscape in a very simple action. And she challenges herself and others to think beyond just how things have always been. I just had to meet her after that, and I was very lucky that I got to do so. I know she has a lot to say about the military influence on sets and how we can counter that in our industry practices. I think that this topic and discussion will blow your mind. So without further ado, here is Becky Morrison.
Woo!
So yeah, let's get into it. Becky, let's talk about the militarization of Hollywood. Can you tell us about your experience with what this means and why you think it came to be?
I would love to. I think, first of all, it's difficult for me to really understand how it all came to be. Even with all of the years I've spent in the trenches in production, all the reading and research I've done, there's no clear explanation that has made itself available to me about why. But I think it's undeniable for any of you who have ever been on a film set, the parallels between being at war, the militarization of the crew, the violence that's baked into even the language that we use. It's so clear from working in production. I think for me, I started as a production assistant, and the first job I ever did, I remember I was so excited to finally be breaking in and getting onto a movie set. I grew up in New York City in Manhattan. I would always see things filming on the street. You'd see the honey wagons and maybe a crane with a light on it. And I was so enamored by it and dreamt about one day being on set, in particular, having my own walkie-talkie. That was my life goal at the time. And when I first got on set, I loved it so much. I drank it, all the culture, the language. I was like quick to be, what's your 20? Go for Becky, go to 2, all that walkie talk, learning the lingo, learning how to operate on set. I absorbed it. I was so happy to be there. And then what happened was that as I went on in my career, I got older, I became a producer, and I realized at some point that I had really changed. My whole personality had changed. I went from being this bright-eyed, eager, open PA to being very aggressive, domineering. I was arguing with the crew about overtime. If somebody rubbed me the wrong way, I would fire them. I became really somebody that I didn't want to be, somebody I didn't even like. And that horrified me. I felt very betrayed by production, honestly, because I felt like I had given myself to production and it had turned me into somebody terrible. And as a result of that, I got very curious of like, wait a minute, okay, why does it have to be this way? Like, who created this system in the first place? Like, why do things feel so militarized? Why am I told to just shut my mouth and do what I'm told and not question? So that sent me on really what is a lifelong journey into research in the history of production, reading, scholarship on some level. I really feel that I'll spend most of my life, if not the rest of my life, in this investigation and inquiry, because it's so fascinating to me. Just all of the things that come with the history of production.
Mm-hmm. You mean like the jargon that we use and just kind of the way things are run?
Yeah, I think that when I started to do that research, what I found, and I've never been a history buff. I don't know about all of you. Maybe you have, Tiffany or Andrew.
A little
Are you
bit.
a
Once upon a
history buff?
time.
I had a feeling. I never really was a big into history because I felt like it was always so dry and didn't relate to my life. And it was just dates and wars. I never was into it until I started this investigation. And I went back into time, into like, let's say the dawn of Hollywood, so the 1910s, 1914, when people first moved to Hollywood from the East Coast to escape Thomas Edison, who I also hadn't realized was a total gangster. Did you know that? You knew.
No.
Did not.
No? Thomas Edison. We think of him as like, this iconic inventor, but that guy was a mafioso. He had something called the MPPC, Motion Picture Patents Company. And he had all the patents on the early motion pictures. And so he made it so that if you wanted to make films back then, you had to get permission from Thomas Edison and his patent company. And if you didn't, you were not allowed to purchase film from Eastman Kodak, and you were not allowed to use any film equipment. So you had to essentially kiss the ring of Thomas Edison and get his permission to make films back at the turn of the century in New Jersey and New York. And otherwise you couldn't make films. So that's when they were called the independents, that they were like, F you, Thomas Edison, we want to make films. We're going to go to California because that's far from Thomas Edison. And that's really one of the reasons, because he couldn't enforce this control he had over the patents when people were far away in California. And also, obviously, the sunlight, the weather, all of the other things that made Hollywood attractive. So those guys were like the Warner Brothers, Adolph Zukor of Paramount, Louis B. Mayer of MGM. Those guys are the ones, as these independents, that went to California to start production companies, which then became, of course, the Big Five. And they're so far from independence now, but they started that way. And what was interesting to me is when Hollywood was first starting to think about the time that was. Yes, photos were black and white, but if you think about it, people were still riding around in horse-drawn carriages. For the most part, Henry Ford unveiled his assembly line in 1913. So that's the era of early Hollywood, 1913, 1914. World War I is going on. Most people in America didn't own a refrigerator or a stove. This is the time. And this is the time. So let's say 1913 also, this is the time before women had the right to vote, before African Americans had the right to vote. It is the olden days. And I say all that because that is when production was created. The systems of production around how do we shoot, the shooting script, which was created by Thomas Ince, around they used to film everything in order. And then Thomas Ince was like, wait a minute, we could actually take a script, break it into parts, and film it out of order. That would be more efficient. Revolutionary, right? Mm-hmm. Also at that time, the director used to do everything. The director would shoot, edit, direct, write. They did everything. It was all one thing. And they started to divide that up into roles, saying, no, let's have a cinematographer and a director and a writer, because that enabled those early studios to be able to make more than one film at one time. all of this is the stage that's set for these production systems to be developed. So these early studio heads looked around at industries in that time. So the factory, as I just mentioned, the assembly line, World War I, the militarized combat of World War I was raging at the same time that Hollywood was being born. So they looked around and thought, okay, we need to create an efficient system that will maximize efficiency and profit. How do we do that? Well, let's model it after the factory and the military. And so they did. I mean, Hollywood became a factory of dreams, early film cameras, even before that time. The first film camera was modeled to look like a rifle, or another one like a revolver. It's all been baked into the industry from the start. And what's so interesting is that this was a very innovative time for Hollywood and those studio heads in developing these systems. And then for some reason, we just fell asleep as an industry and just continued to replicate the same systems that were developed in the 1910s and 1920s for the next 100 years, really without thinking much about it ever again and just replicating. So, I find that fascinating.
It is fascinating. I'm like, tell me more. And I'm not someone who necessarily cares a lot about history, but the way that you're telling me, I'm like, oh yes, I'm hanging on to every word. I'm like, I want to know more. Andrew, did you have a question? You look like you have a question.
Yeah, well, I just really, I mean, thank you, Becky, for just that rundown. And I think, again, one of the things that is shocking to me is just like, I've never thought about this. And I'm like, why have I never thought about why are things the way that they are? And I think for so many of the complaints that we have about the ways that the industry feels out of step with our modern moment, and it feels like we are trying to revise and rebuild some of these systems to be more inclusive, to be more accepting. It's incredible to think, and really go back to it, is like, yes, the film industry is full of artisans who are practicing their craft, but it is also an industry. And I think what you said in terms of maximizing efficiency and return on investment as a way to look at what are the means of production, why do things unfold in the way that they do. So I just feel like, an entire new way of thinking about why we do the things the way that they do has been opened up. And I'm like, now I want to read some articles about this and read some books, just because I think for us to think about what alternatives could be, we have to be rooted in the understanding of where these things come from and why they exist.
Exactly. I'm not a historian. I am a producer. I own a production company. For me, that is my passion. My passion is now, the here and now. What does the production experience look like? But exactly as you said, in order to meaningfully challenge what exists currently or to innovate, we have to understand where it came from and what the motivations were of the people who designed it. And for me, what's very inspiring about it is also realizing that it was literally like 5 guys with mustaches and top hats that invented this. So when people are like, oh, it's impossible to change, I'm like, I don't, actually, that's historically inaccurate because that's who created this. So it's very possible in my mind that a few of us can now design a new kind of production approach that integrates our values that we're talking about, that takes into consideration things that they never thought about in 1915. Like in 1915, again, like the films were all black and white, right? Mm-hmm. Not only that, they were silent. They were silent black and white films when those guys with the top hats created this production process. So the technology of filmmaking has tremendously evolved since 1915. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. No one's going to dispute that. And yet production itself, the way the labor is organized, the roles, the language, the culture, none of that has been innovated. It's been completely frozen in time. And that is a very fascinating investigation to think about why. I have some ideas. I think it's a lifelong journey, like I said, to understand why. But I think it's undeniable when we look at the history to see that it really hasn't changed much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so with the history of this and talking about bringing it to now, the present, What are some of the things that you've noticed, as you've become a producer and you've started to notice that your attitude about things have become a certain way? Like, what are specific things that you've really noticed that are parallels to, the military?
Well, I haven't served in the military, so I don't have an inside view of that. But in my understanding of what the military is like, I think a huge one is the go-to aspects of it, I would say, would be the roles and the way that we interact between our superiors and the subordinates. I feel like that very much mirrors what I would imagine is in the military, in terms of you're low in the hierarchy. You do what you're told. You keep your mouth shut. You pay your dues. You don't ask questions. You follow the leader. All of that kind of stuff that goes into breaking you down too. I think a lot of the way that we work with the long hours, with the challenge, it's very difficult physically and psychologically in the same kind of way that's parallel to being in battle. I've also often heard people say, like, we're in the trenches or at battle, and that culture in a way gets worshipped, gets to be something that we're all like, oh yeah, I got this scar in my face from that battle, or like, I didn't sleep for 27 hours on that music video. It becomes this weird like thing that we suffered through, but also a badge of honor. I think that's one aspect of it that I would refer to as the culture. Another is for sure the language. The language it's all there. I mean, just think about how it's called a film shoot. Okay. We're shooting. Mm-hmm. I've been on a job where the AD's like, yeah, we're just going to shoot these kids tomorrow. It's like, whoa, are you listening to what you're saying? Shooting, cut, shotgun mic, boom mic, it's run and gun. Even like the red camera has like an arsenal of the weapon, the rocket, the dragon. We're gonna pull the trigger. It's drop dead. Let's kill it. All of that kind of language is so much inside of the way that we work in film production. And so I think that's also very much, those are parallels to the military and to war.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. Andrew, you're gonna about to say something too.
Well, I was gonna say, I think in thinking about, department heads, I think in thinking about, again, sort of the ways in which there's a top-down hierarchical organization, and it's, I think, to the point, it's like, yes, efficient, it's like, okay, the process, but I think, what does that culture invite? And I think when, as you said, people are told to shut up and just follow orders, when there is a glorification of how tough can you be, are you really willing to show up? Are you willing to give it your all? I think it's interesting when we think about some of the issues that have come to light that our industry has in terms of abuses of power, in terms of people's voices not being heard, in terms of unsafe working conditions, and I think some of the incidents of that we've seen in the last couple of years where crew members have lost their lives, there is, I think your point is like, there are upsides in terms of productivity and workflow, but what are the downsides and what are the costs, of this organization?
Yeah, there's enormous downsides. And what always strikes me as so curious is that, yes, it is efficient in a lot of ways. And yet we are not making cars on an assembly line, and we are not going to war. We're making movies, or we're making commercials or music videos, which inherently are creative endeavors. So it's very bizarre to me that we're using a system that 100% depletes people's creativity and their life force. But what we're after, our goals as an industry, is maximum creativity. Well, something's discordant there, that we want maximum creativity. We want innovation. We want awards. We want these beautiful stories being told. But yet behind the camera, people are suffering across the board. I mean, we all know that too. It's one of those things that we all realize. And I'm not saying that's true on every single production, but it's absolutely a systemic issue throughout the industry overall. Why are we continuing to do that? The only reason I can come up with is because it's the way it's been done. Nobody now sitting in 2022, when asked to design a production process, would design the one that we have now. I can't imagine a world in which that would happen. I think if we were to start with a blank slate and say, okay, we've imagined that we're the independents, we're just moving, we're starting for the first time, how would we design production? We would have so many different ideas about how labor should be organized, how workers should be treated, how to design that from an organizational system standpoint than they did in 1915. That was even just coming off, like it's hard to think about history, especially at that time, without thinking about how close that was to the end of slavery and the massive influence that the industrialization of slavery had on industry. It's not always talked about in a mainstream way, but you cannot deny that. I mean, like Thomas Edison, invented the motion picture 20 years after slavery ended. Like the connection between that and the connection between the way people thought about labor and also Frederick Winslow Taylor, all of that scientific management theory that went into the industrial revolution around, the workers being these unintelligent people and the managers being these smart college boys, and the workers needed to be controlled and told what to do because they couldn't think. And the managers were the ones who were smart. I mean, all of that has come into production. The term, which I refuse to use around above the line and below the line, is a perfect example of that. Those who are above the line are paid the most, they're the most valuable, they're the most intelligent, thoughtful, and the ones below the line are replaceable cogs in a machine made of people. So the parallels, none of this is in isolation. Hollywood does not exist in isolation. It exists in relationship to industry, in relationship to the history of this country, and the systems that are present in the history of this country are absolutely present in Hollywood. And if we want to have a meaningful conversation around inclusion, around equity, around diversity, we have to be looking at these systems that we're using in production, the origins of them. We have to dismantle them, and we have to create new systems that are grounded in the ideology that we want to be perpetuating.
100%. All I can do is keep on nodding because I'm like, yes. It would be really beautiful to see a film set not feel like, or, not be run like we're in a war zone, right? Like it would be, especially as someone who is quote unquote above the line as a director, it's like the work to me is collaborative. And instead of me asking people to do things for me, it's more of we're doing this together. And that's the better mindset to have. So thank you so much for laying that out for us, Becky. I want to turn it over to the present again. And I know that in your company at The Light, I know that you've implemented production innovation based on, what has previously been established in our industry, specifically militarization. So I'm curious, what are these ways that you've done this?
First of all, the work that we're doing at The Light, I really view it as a kind of innovation lab, and not at all as the answers, but really an exploration of what might a different way of working look like. Because there are things about the traditional model that work. That's why we've been doing them. There's absolutely things that work. It's not like when you come to one of our sets that we're like, this is the lighting guru, or like, no, it's a gaffer. Like we have a gaffer. It's not like, I just want to be clear also, it's like not so out there, but I do think that it's worth challenging all the aspects of the way we do things. And we may find, actually, that does make sense. Let's keep doing that exactly the way it's been done. And then we'll push up against another part of the industry and say, actually, I don't think it has to be done that way. Let's try something new. And then we'll do something new. And you out there who are listening, you may come up with a totally different idea about how to do it new. So it's really an exploration and innovation lab, I would say, when it comes to all of that. I think the fundamental way to start dismantling some of this militarization has to do with bringing humanity into production. So the way that militarization works, or the way, whatever we want to call that whole toxic system, which is based around fear and coercion and suppression of dissent and dehumanization, and you're a line number on a call sheet, you're not a human being. The way to counter that is to center people's humanity. So we do that in a lot of different ways on our sets. One, as you mentioned, Tiffany, is that the call sheet looks totally different. It became an unethical for me to be making a call sheet that, number one, put people in boxes, and number two, organize them hierarchically. With everything that the light stands for, it felt like I can't even do that anymore. So what might it look like to do a call sheet differently? So we have our call sheet, it's organized by call time, and it's photographs of everybody that they supply, so that before you get to set, you can even see who you're working with. You see their faces. And in a COVID universe, you can actually see the bottom half of their face on the call sheet because they're not wearing a mask. Another thing we do is that when people arrive on our sets, we have all pre-labeled, magnetized name tags with their name, their crew position, their pronouns, so that when people arrive on set, they're like, oh, wait, I don't see my name tag. And then they see it and they immediately get a sense of belonging, being included. They put on their name tag, and then people on set have such an easier time finding each other, communicating, having real human interactions, because your name is right there on your lapel. And if you can't even remember it, you can look at the call sheet. So it's a lot about bringing people's humanity to the forefront, and also centering the crew's experience, prioritizing the crew's experience. That is such an overlooked aspect of production to me. I can't even believe it. Talk about an untapped market. Like, for years and years and years, we've been caring about the client's experience on set, the agency, the talent, and then nobody gave a fuck about the crew. Like, why? Why not? For no additional funds, you can essentially just prioritize their experience. You can say, oh, we care about how the third grip feels on set. So we onboard all the crew. We get their dietary restrictions. We get their snack requests. It's like, if you want yerba mate, we got you, Andrew. Like, it's not that big a deal for us. Wasabi peas, sure, no problem. If that's going to make your day better, we're going to have that for you to show that we care. And we're going to pay you quickly. We're not going to make you fight for your paycheck. And then at the end of the year, we take 25% of our profits and we distribute it back to the crew. All of these things are examples of dismantling a system that is founded in dehumanizing human beings, founded in greed and oppression, and really reimagining what production might look like if it was designed to give and to support and to uplift people.
I just have to say, I am so inspired. And I hope that one day I get to visit one of your sets, because I think, just I'm having a very visceral reaction to the things that you are describing. And I think when you're talking about bringing people's humanity back to the forefront, and even I think just the process of putting people's photos on the call sheet, I think in so many of the sets that I've been on, there is this air, and again, there's an environment of fear. Right? There's this environment. It's like, well, we can replace you. You're replaceable. We could get somebody who could do your job tomorrow. And I think, again, if we're thinking about how do we make the best product, how do we make the best art? How are we telling the best stories? And I think, from the top of the hierarchy down, I think when you have multinational conglomerates who are worried about their content, they aren't necessarily attuned to, well, what does it take to make something? Filmmaking is perhaps the most collaborative art form. I think, Tiffany, as you said, to be a leader, and this idea of like, you're not doing it for me, but we are doing this together. I think giving people a sense of ownership, giving people a sense of this is something that I can invest in. And it's very hard, I think, for people, and especially for crew members, to invest in a project in which they feel is not invested in them, in which they don't matter, in which nobody really knows who they are. And so I think just it's so inspiring to hear, that the environment that you are intentionally building. And I think what that can do not only for, the art that is created and the stories that are coming out of that, but just people's experiences. Like, so many people suffer on film sets. I think there are so many people who are miserable, who feel like they are talked down to, who feel like they are disrespected. And like, yes, these are high stress environments. Yes, there is money on the table. Yes, we have to, finish on time and on budget. But I think this idea of it doesn't have to be an environment in which we're trying to extract value from people without pouring back into them. And I think, Becky, what you said about, the history of labor in America is inherently woven into the history of labor in the entertainment industry. And when we think about how many generations of laborers, both those who were paid and those who were not paid, have been disrespected and treated as if they were disposable. And again, talking about the Industrial Revolution, talking about labor laws, I'm so proud of the fact that our industry, has such a high indexing of unions and guilds and collective bargaining, on behalf of crew members and behalf of laborers, because it's incredibly important for those protections to exist. And so I just want to shout you out for taking a proactive approach and saying, if I'm in a position of leadership, I want to try to build a model that is different. I want to try to build a model that is reflective of my ethos, that is reflective of how I want people to feel when they come and work for me. And it sounds so radical, but it doesn't feel like it was that difficult for you to do. It took a little bit of extra time. It took a little bit of extra intention, but it doesn't feel like it costs you much. It doesn't feel like these are costs that are really being passed on to clients. It doesn't feel like this is running up your budget. So thank you just for being a leader and an example in this field. And just I think there is so much to learn from in the models of the experiments that you all are running, and the idea of the light being an innovation laboratory. I'm blown away. And that's just me.
Not just you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Tiffany. I was like, am I alone here? Do I feel like I'm hearing the future?
No, I mean, yeah, I honestly am like, damn, I wish this could be the future. I mean, it would be not even just because it is a new model or a new way of thinking that, we haven't seen implemented very much in the past, but also because it is actually genuinely helpful. Like, as someone who sometimes walks onto a set and I have no idea who anyone is except for maybe the head departments, all that stuff. Like, if I could see everyone's faces on a picture and correlate them with their name and position, it would help me as a creator, someone who has to speak to everyone at some point in the day, to know everyone's face and to be able to address them in the right way, because sometimes you get a little afraid of like, oh, I don't remember their name or whatever. So things like that are incredibly just helpful. And it's not even, and it helps me also be a better collaborator, I think. And I think, again, for everyone else too, to be like, oh, okay, we can call each other by each other's names and we can know who each other is. And by having their picture on it, it makes them feel special too. And I think it's really beautiful. And I really would like to challenge people in this industry, people who can implement these kind of practices. Like, this is a way to do it. And this is really a way to actually help, sort of contrary to what we're saying, but, it actually helps us be a lot more efficient. So, and I think it actually is really, it would just be really helpful for everyone in general. Yeah. Things like that are fantastic.
I was just curious to hear just a little bit about what the adoption process, for some of these measures has been like. Like, what have the reactions been? I think for crew members who haven't worked on one of your sets before to get this call sheet that's different, like, what's that process been like for people? What have some of those reactions been like? Like, how's it been to buck the trend that is a century long, and do something new? And how do people feel going through that process?
Very different reactions. I would say by far overwhelmingly positive reactions for the most part. The people that generally don't like the call sheet are the ADs, the first ADs. They do not like the call sheet because they're used to seeing the call sheet in a certain way. And, we want to honor that too by like giving the ADs their own call sheet that they could do a production report off of. I can understand that too. COVID compliance. loves our call sheet because they can check people in by call time. I think in general, the response has been very positive. Of course, when you're making any kind of change, there's people that don't like it. That's inevitable. One of the other things we have as part of our process is that we constantly request feedback from people. So at the end of every job, we have feedback forms for the crew to fill out, and they can tell us what was great about the production, what wasn't good, what did you like, what did you not like, and then we integrate that into our production process, sometimes almost immediately. We did a production recently for Netflix, and somebody wrote on the feedback form. We had paper feedback forms at that time on set. It was a multi-day production. They were like, it would have been nice to have dessert at lunch today. We were like, oh my God, of course. Why didn't we have dessert? Next day we had dessert. Or someone wrote, we could use another PA in the production department. We hired another PA. So having this kind of real-time feedback from people allows us to be responsive and to curate and to design the production experience in a way that works for people. So like I said, overwhelmingly positive. Sometimes some people don't love everything. We had actually a grip. This was very funny. This grip, I won't name him by name, but he rode in on like a Harley. He saw the name tags and he was like, there's no fucking way I'm wearing that name tag. This was a 4-day film experience. And so he didn't wear the name tag. No problem. We're not going to make you wear the name tag. Day 2, he wasn't wearing the name tag. Day 3, I come in. He's there bright and early wearing the name tag. I was like, oh, I see. He came around. And then at the last day of the production, he came up to me and he said, I got to say, I see what you're doing. It's really good. Please don't stop doing what you're doing. We need it. And then he was like, rah, 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 and then rode off his motorcycle. I cried. I literally, real tears came out of my eyes because I was like, out of all the people, that's the most meaningful compliment to me. Because sometimes people are so steeped and have been so abused and so mistreated by production, which is my department. Like, they have a reason to be antagonistic. They have a reason to come in aggressive. When people come in aggressive, I'm like, I totally understand. It's like it's like a puppy who's been abused. Like, I'm not fighting that. It's like, you have been abused in the past. This is not that place. Like, let us show you something else. And very often, I've seen it time and time again, crew completely come around. It was a DIT. No offense to the DITs out there. Sometimes they're not the early adopters of this stuff. I had a DIT. We had a safety meeting. I was talking about how we were going to do something called MVC, which is the most valuable crew member. We do this on set too, where people can vote for their first, second, and third choice MVC. That's for crew members who elevated their experience on set. So people who really made their day on set better. That's the criteria for voting for MVC. So during the safety meeting, when I'm talking about it, I can see out of the corner of my eye, this DIT is like, this fucking stupid bitch. Like, it's bumbling and looking down. I'm like, stay strong, Becky. Just keep going. I explained it, and he was just grumbling the whole time. But it became a very funny thing on the production. Like, the dolly grip did this great dolly move. Someone screamed out, MVC. The Phoenix came over to the video village and was like, I get you guys anything, want any tea? And his friend was like, you're just trying to get MVC, And then at the end, we announced the MVC winners. It was during the Olympics. And so one of the grips threw down an apple box to make like a podium. And it's always the best people. It's the people that everybody loves that are celebrated. It's never the director or the producer or the AD. It's often craft services. I'm not going to lie. It's often crafty. Mm-hmm. It's often like the coordinator or a PA or a second AD. So this time it was the gaffer. And I looked at her and I was like, you're MVC, like, you're the number one pick. And her eyes filled with tears. She was like, I've never won anything before. I was like, look, they love you. And she looks out at the room and everyone's clapping. And I look over at the DIT and he's like, and he has like his arm around somebody sniffling. And I was like, see, that DIT came around in a space of love. Like, you can't, design productions to the lowest common denominator or to people who have been hurt and abused. Like, this is a high vibration space. And when you create high vibration spaces, it's an opportunity for everyone inside of that to rise to that vibration. And if they don't, that's okay too. I'm not talking about like expelling people who don't like this. It's about creating a different kind of space and a different kind of frequency and way of working. So ultimately, I don't know why someone wouldn't like it, because we're paying them quickly. We're giving them more money than they expect. We're giving them healthy food. We're giving them good food. It's not really something that you would reject. You're like, no, please hold my check for 30 more days. It's like people like it because we're prioritizing the crew. And for the first time, we're putting them front and center. We're showing them the work afterwards. We're sending them the work. We're like, remember, we're asking you to engage and care about this. But most of the time, then nobody cares about them. Like you said, Andrew, it's unfair. If I'm asking you to engage in this work and be here, then I need to honor that by when the work is done, sharing that with you. You want to see what you worked on. That's a huge part of the process that's often left out. And that's something that we put in as well. So anyway, I was babbling a little bit there, but you get the idea.
I love it. You could keep on talking about these stories. The thing is, film sets can be really fun, right? Like, they can be really exciting, and there's like a lot of cool things happening. You know, you have this cool like dolly move, or, you know, these actors doing these crazy things and these cool costumes. There's a lot of fun things that happen on set. But I think what is nice is that with what you're saying, with all your practices, that you're curating that fun to feel like everyone belongs in it. You know, versus that it only kind of belongs to the people that kind of take the credit and all that stuff. So I think like that is like, it almost feels like summer camp, you know, and it's just, I want to be on your set, 'cause I'm like, I want to have those laughs with those people and call someone an MVC or whatever. Like, it'd be cool. I'm so down for that. And I think, I really hope that people can continue to do what you're doing and see this happen in action. I want to be on your set. Essentially is what I'm saying.
You're all invited, 100%. 100% invited. And I think what's also what we're talking about here is everyone who's worked on, if you're listening out there and you've been on set, like you've been on a set most likely where you felt like expanded and inspired and like you were part of something magical, right? That's why we're in this industry. And then it's also very likely that you've worked on a set where you felt abused and depleted, and maybe it even had you question like, wait, why did I get in this business in the first place? Like, that is a paradox of our business, and it can give us life and it can take it away. And what I'm interested in doing is finding the technology. You know, I consider this designing an architecture of the production experience so that reliably and replicably you can deliver a positive experience for people on set. Because like you said, Tiffany, sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And when you walk on set at call time, you don't always know which one you're walking into. So what I'm talking about is actually designing the underlying architecture of the experience. Almost like when you go to Disneyland, like you don't get off the Incredicoaster feeling sad. It's impossible because they've designed that experience to uplift you. So what might it look like to design a production experience that uplifts people reliably every time, where it's not left to chance whether you're going to have a good day or a bad day? We know that you're going to have a good day.
100%.
What you're doing is so inspirational. And again, I think I'll say this and just sharing, it's like there are moments, you know, in the last, you know, 10, almost 15 years that I've been working in the industry where I think I had some of those feelings of, well, why are we doing this? Why are people treated in this way? I think being in working environments that do not reflect how I wish to move through the world and how I wish people to treat. And I think in the projects where I have operated as a producer and been in that role of responsibility, I think trying to do my best to, you know, help make an environment that people, you know, can be proud to have participated in and can think about and be proud of the work that they did and how they were treated. And I think it is something, again, that gets so lost because we're worried about the budget, we're worried about making the day, we're worried about all of these things. And all of those things are critically important. But I think at the end of the day, when we think about how can we do this work in a sustainable way, I think treating people as human beings and remembering the fact that everybody who shows up on set has a life. Everybody who shows up on set is coming from dealing with something with their family or their kids or their parents or loved ones. And so I think this is just such a humanistically grounded way to think about how to practice this craft. And again, I've just never heard anyone talk about this, in these ways. And I think like this is the type of thinking, this is the type of work that can help take our industry into the next century. Like we are in a crisis moment in our industry. There's this questions, everybody's freaked out about TikTok. Everyone's freaked out about what are we going to do? What's happening? What's happening in theatrical? And this feels in some ways like beyond finding some piece of IP that we can reboot or remake. This feels like a key way to re-inject, I think, some of the vitality in our industry that has been ground out. And again, I think that to the connections of the topic, my brother was talking about, he's a filmmaker and he's a poet. He's a really brilliant guy, but he sort of talked about feeling like we're in the entertainment industrial complex and just feeling like content is being churned out, product is being made. But again, it's a factory system. It's a conveyor belt. It's just put the pieces together. And ultimately, when we think about why people are spending so much time on TikTok or YouTube or Twitch and abandoning, I think, abandoning Hollywood in some ways, we also have to look at, how does the way that we make things bleed into how people feel when they're watching them? And having worked at companies where people were abused, where the sets were a nightmare, that bleeds into the work. Like you can tell when people are having fun, you can tell when there's good energy in a project, like you can feel, you may not be able to point to it, but I think this may be an answer to some of those questions that everyone in our industry is grappling with of how do we get people to come back and remember what it is that they love about movies, what they love about TV shows, what, touches them about a commercial or a piece of branded content that they see. And I think, we've forgotten in a lot of ways the audiences that we serve. And I think we have also forgotten the people that help us make these things. To treat crew as disposable is counterfactual to our ultimate goal to create a transcendent artistic experience that, yes, can make a lot of people in C-suites a bunch of money, but also can make people feel transformed and can touch people's hearts and minds. So all of that to say, again, thank you for doing this work. Thank you for speaking about it. Like, thank you for plowing ahead and being a pioneer. And it's like, this is such an example that you are setting. And again, I think when Tiffany first had the idea for what this podcast could be, for what these conversations could be, and when she talked about why she wanted to invite you, and what you're doing, like, Tiffany, I get it fully. You're brilliant. But just thank you for coming and sharing this with us and allowing this to be a venue where we can talk about the things that aren't working, but also, I think, institute a call to action and say, here's an example for how we might change things. And again, I'll say it again, it's like this feels like the future. And this is a future that I want to be a part of. And the idea and knowing that people like you are building a different model of making art and making filmic art makes me want to recommit to this industry and makes me want to double down and sort of work more in it, because it can be very grim and it can deplete you. But this conversation alone has filled me up, and I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. Even in the space that I'm in, it's not often that I can have a conversation that's this explicit, that this honest, that goes this deep, because there's not spaces for it. So I'm hugely grateful to both of you. And as you know, I'm a super fan of your podcast, and both of you, and you too, Nzinga, for the opportunity to talk about this. Because I think also, like, the reality is, if we're talking about the future, the generation that's coming up is not going to stand for what has been. They're just not. Mm-hmm. Like, the fact that even the roles are so siloed and so singular. And I look at these kids that are coming up, such a large percentage of whom are non-binary. Like, it's such a beautiful thing to me. Like, if you're non-binary, how could you go into a role that's like, you're just going to be a grip for 40 years, and then your kids are going to be a grip and your grandkids are going to be a grip? No, you have many aspects of yourself that you want to explore and contribute with. And so there, people that are coming up, I see it so much more than when I was coming up. Like, people who are editors, producers, directors, dancers, singers, like, they can do so many things. And I think that generation is not going to fit into this antiquated, bloated, rigid production model that we've created. And it's also the reason why it costs so much money to make things. Instead of thinking about like, wait, why are we doing it this way? We continue to do it this way and just pour more and more and more money into it. It's like, why don't we think about how could we do this, take the money and use it differently, or reimagine the roles, or the whole thing, I think is a really exciting arena to be exploring as we move into the future. And also this generation that's coming up, like you said, from TikTok or Twitch, it's like, they're just not going to fit into what has been. We have to create something different.
Absolutely. And on that note, I do want to ask, I mean, and you've obviously talked about the call sheet, how we could redo that, what practices you implement on set. But for people who are still kind of grappling with working in the industry as a whole, what are things that they could do? What are solutions that we can implement, or how do we reframe even some of the terms that we talk about? Like, what do you say for, instead of film shoot, what kind of words do you use instead? Or I would love to know some of those bigger term solutions for you.
I say film instead of shoot, and it's not always easy. Sometimes I haven't really been using shoot that much at all, but for a while I was like, okay, I'm going to use shoot as a noun, but not as a verb. So I have a shoot, but I'm filming, something like that. So that I think the verb shoot is what is even the most most aggressive.
Right.
So I say film. I say film day on our call sheets instead of shoot day. It's film day. Another one I say is, instead of running gun, running fun. That's such a perfect example of like, if you're telling me the day is going to be running gun, what does that mean? It's going to be difficult. We're going to be moving around a lot. It's going to be hard.
It's going to be hard to find a bathroom, all that stuff.
Exactly. Just by the way that we labeled it, we know how that day is going to go. Running fun, on the other hand, you're going to have bathrooms abounding. It's going to be great. So I think that a big part of it is like you're pointing to just being conscious of the language that we use. Language shapes culture, shapes our reality. It is so powerful, the language that we use. So just by elevating our consciousness in that way, you can start to feel the energy of the words. I'm big on words and their energy. So if I hear a word and I'm like, ooh, that word feels wrong, I try to find some other way to say it. I'm thinking of other examples. I know, with another one is more around gendered words that we don't use. So best boy, we say best grip, best electric. Wouldn't you rather be the best electric than the best boy electric? So
yeah.
Best. I'm trying to think, really also that's a big part of it too. I mean, there's a clear tie between what we're talking about around militarization and also masculinity, and how that we could have a whole other podcast on the influence of how masculinity plays into this.
That's a plan.
Oh, great. I can't wait to listen to that one too. And the language that we use is also the same way that the language we use is violent. It's often very gendered. So the more conscious we can be about that, the better.
I love that. Yeah, 100%. I mean, my mind right now is like, oh my God, how many terms that I use all the time that are so violent and very masculine and military based. So I am definitely going to be very conscious of that moving forward. And I think that is going to really make a difference for sure in the way I think about stuff. So,
and the key is to have fun with it. Like sometimes people can get very aggressive also about policing it. Like a crew member came up to someone from my team on a job that we did recently, and they were like, "Hey, excuse me, someone over there said guys." And we're like, okay, we're just supposed to come in as like the polite police and be like, no, you can't say guys. Like that's fine. And we're all going to say it. It's not about like being like, we're not allowed to say this anymore. I think that's where people go, oh, I can't say that anymore. You can continue to say it for as long as you want, simply offering that, to be conscious about the impact that language has. So have fun with it,
100%. Thank you so much, Becky, for talking about this and, illuminating so many cool practices and the things and actions that you do to kind of counter this militarization of film. I really appreciate everything that you've had to say, Andrew, as well. And yeah, I guess as a wrap up, a philosophical wrap up, do you have any inspiring thoughts on this topic for one last hurrah?
Oh my gosh. I thought that was an Andrew. Was that a kickoff to Andrew? I feel like, what is your philosophical wrap up?
Nope, that's you, Becky. That's you.
Oh my gosh. I guess, I don't know, a philosophical. Well, I'll say this, that when I think of militarization and the results of that and the results of violence on people and on this industry, I think of the way that it has been extractive, the way that the system itself is extractive, the way that we've extracted from the environment from day one with how much like film and precious metals have been used to make film, the way that, you know, Owens Valley was dried up to, you know, give water to Hollywood, the huge environmental impact that we've had, the extraction of that, how we extract from people, how people's life force. Like, I know that for myself, like I have suffered, I have wrinkles, I have scars from what I've left on the ground working on a production for segments that never even made it to air, like things that ended up on the cutting room floor. I've given my soul and my life to it. It's like this extractive nature of production is the historical framework we've been operating with. What I would like to encourage people to explore is a regenerative system of production. What does regenerative production look like? What might it look like to be regenerative to the environment? Not just sustainable, regenerate the environment through our productions, regenerate our communities through the productions. When we work on set in different communities, how can we contribute to those communities rather than take away from them? With people, how can we have a framework for production that actually gives people life, where people leave set feeling better than when they arrived? It is 100% possible. It is not a pipe dream, because I see it happen every day on our sets. And I'm passionate about seeing this industry start to wake up and be creative. That is our superpower around how we approach production to create a regenerative, life-giving, uplifting production experience.
No one can hear us, or now you can have it.
Snaps.
Ooh, I love it. That is a fantastic way to end this podcast episode. Andrew, do you want to do the outro, or should I do it?
I will happily do it. I will
Thank
happily
you.
do it. Thank you all for listening to Film Philosophy. Thank you to our guest, Becky Morrison. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Nzinga. Thank you to the listeners. We're so grateful that you've spent this time with us as we've explored these ideas. And again, our purpose and our intention with these conversations is to not only shed a light on where we have been as an industry, but where we could go. As Becky has shared today, there are so many things that are rooted in a century-old practice that if we apply a little ingenuity and intention, we can create new modes and methods of creating art that are regenerative, that are restorative, that are inclusive, and that are based in people's underlying humanity. Thank you for spending this time with us. For more resources, you can visit our website at filmphilosophy.com. That's film and then philosophy with an F.com. Up there, we will post educational resources, any articles that we've mentioned, any historical resources for further reading. If for anyone who has a thought, a question, feedback, or is inspired by anything that we've talked about, you can reach us by email. The email is filmphilosophy.tme@gmail.com. Again, that's filmphilosophy, film, filosophy.tme@gmail.com. We encourage you to send an audio message by email so we could play it back on our podcast. And if you're shy, all good. Thank you so much for listening. We had so much fun with Becky on this topic that we kept talking after we wrapped the episode. So please enjoy some bonus content from our chat. Again, you can find it on our website, filmphilosophy.com. Again, that's film and then philosophy with an F.com. This is Film Philosophy, and we'll see you next time.